magazine also tell another story. Enduring danger and hardship, they travel the globe to bring back these astonishing images. Their stories are as fascinating as the pictures they take. From exotic locations worldwide, these men and women can take a moment and make it last forever. Now, go behind the lens with National Geographic and meet the photographers.
And now, our feature presentation.
This is a stern and unforgiving land, a withering desert tormented by the sun. Only the most superbly adapted creatures can survive here, and the blink of an eye can separate life from death. Here, everything needed for existence is so scarce that it can only be won by cunning and unrelenting struggle. But the extreme conditions in this desert also produce strange and wonderful alliances, like the shadowy liaison between cactus and bat that allows both to survive and to reproduce. Here, every living scrap is gathered in. And here, in the contest between hunters and the hunted, even the victim's blood can be deployed in defense. This could be a place of subtle violence, ravaged by the sun for months on end. Then suddenly swept by fire and violent storms. But far from a wasteland, this is a place where life is triumphant. It is molded to the rhythms of day and night, of feast and famine, in ways so ingenious, so tenacious, that the desert is transformed. This is a place like no other. The Sonoran Desert, a violent Eden. The Sonoran is no ordinary desert. This arid landscape bears the scars of a turbulent past. Lava welled up from deep within the earth. Great mountain ranges were thrust up from below. Sand from ancient seas scoured its face. It covers 100,000 square miles of Southern California, Arizona, and Mexico, including the Mexican state that is also called Sonora. Deserts are often thought to be barren and monotonous, but the Sonoran is far from that. Because of its varied terrain, this desert has many climates. Its mountains are relatively cool and they capture occasional rains. Other parts are searing hot and desperately dry. In some years, rainfall amounts to only an inch or two. Of all the American deserts, the Sonoran is the most diverse, and it is dominated by giants that can live for 200 years. The giant Saguaro cactus grows only here. The largest weigh over 8 tons and contain almost 2,000 gallons of water. Some took root here when the land was part of Spanish Mexico and still stand up to 5 stories tall. Leaves are a liability here. They evaporate too much water. So plants like cacti don't have any. They have green stems instead. Or, like the Palo Verde, they can shed their leaves entirely in times of drought. Some plants seem to be dead, forced into dormancy by the Sonoran's arid furnace. But this domination by the sun is not constant. There are distinct seasons, and occasionally the desert is caught in the firm grip of winter. So long as the snows melt within a few hours, no permanent harm is done, and the desert reveals another side of its bleak enchantment. Late winter is a comfortable time in the desert. It is cool, and in some years there is even a little moisture left from winter rains. But for many, food is scarce. Little remains from the previous year. Somehow, the Sonoran Desert supports the javelina, a tropical species right at the northern limit of its range. Adaptable and hardy, javelina live in tight-knit family groups and eat almost anything. The acrid sap of the prickly pear, and even the spines. But a leg pierced by cactus spines means that despite the help of his family, this javelina's days are numbered. In March, as temperatures climb into the 80s, warmth slowly percolates into the dark crannies and crevices of the Sonoran landscape. Diamondback rattlesnakes spend the winter together in underground den sites, safe from predators and the worst of the cold. Now they warm up and become more active, making their way out to bask in the spring sunshine. For the females, several weeks of sunbathing helps their eggs develop. Soon they will breed. Now mature males have to establish which of them is to get prime access to the females. This astonishing game of one-upmanship is a behavior ritual rather than an all-out fight. It allows the snakes to work out which is the stronger without inflicting physical harm. For the next several days, the victor will chase away his rivals until his dominance is firmly established. The females, meanwhile, just look on and relax. The dominant male returns from the chase to claim his conquests. He checks out all his females to see if any are ready to breed. His head-rubbing courtship display is eager and persistent, but only when a female is absolutely ready for breeding will she allow them to couple. The pair may be locked together for a day or more, an opportunity for rival males to sneak back to other females in the den. Eventually, they free themselves from their entanglements and set off to find food. Their journey takes a number of weeks and can cover several miles. They have not eaten for 5 months, and so for their prey, the desert is now a death trap. This male Gila monster has spent the winter underground. 95% of his life is spent resting and saving his strength. He is superbly adapted to life here. In defense against predators, he has a savage, venomous bite. He can store energy in his oddly shaped tail, enough to sustain him for a year or more. Now he has just a few weeks to eat and breed, and he is usually active for only an hour or so at dusk and dawn. He is never more dangerous. Antelope squirrels are too agile. The lizard is interested in food that can't run away, like a nest full of eggs, or the squirrel's babies. For the female diamondback, her first kill of the season. Her venom glands were full, and it takes only a few minutes for the venom to work. When her victim is quite dead, the diamondback starts to swallow it, taking care to start at the head. This way, the squirrel's limbs fold neatly, and the set of its fur helps it slide down more easily. The diamondback's jawbones spread apart, permitting the snake to swallow prey many times bigger than its own skull. A final yawn resets her jaw. The diamondback will need many weeks to mature her eggs, but for others, the breeding season is well underway by April. The javelina already have piglets, so they can grow up in the desert's most bountiful season. The monster is still on the move, searching for signs of a mate or a meal. The Gambel's quail's strategy is camouflage, but the monster's tongue can detect the merest trace of a scent. Food at last. He devours everything he can find. Another male arrives, and a fight breaks out. Like the snakes, the males are battling for territory and dominance. The one who most easily throws his opponent will emerge the victor. All across the desert, breeding animals and nesting birds are standing watch over their hidden young, and predators are looking for them in a deadly game of hide and seek that has been played here for millions of years. The white-footed deer mouse is a diligent, successful mother. Her pink babies are a week old and growing rapidly. The mother's instinct is to flee. She cannot save her babies, but at least she will survive to breed again. By mid-April, rising temperatures begin to suck the desert dry. And yet it is these conditions that trigger one of Sonora's most astonishing events. The prickly pear begins to bloom. With up to 1,000 flowers per cactus and hundreds of cacti per acre, there is a phenomenal but temporary glut of food. Over 60 gallons of nectar and 6.5 pounds of pollen per acre in some places, all sustained by water stored by the cacti from the previous year. What desert creature could possibly consume such a feast? An astonishing insect called Diadasia rinconus, the cactus bee. Female Diadasia gather by the hundreds of thousands to build their nests, drawn together by a special scent they all give off now. On arrival, each works feverishly on her own to dig a tunnel up to 1.5 feet deep in the sandy desert soil. Over the entrance, she constructs a curved turret by sticking particles of soil together with her tail. And each bee creates a turret of her own design. The nest site looks like a graveyard studded with bizarre tombstones. This patch of desert, about the size of a residential lot, is a densely packed nursery. Its demonic humming can be heard 100 yards away. This all happens precisely when the prickly pears are in flower. Virtually the entire colossal crop of pollen and nectar is collected by the bees and ferried back to their tunnels. Diadasia and prickly pear, the bee and the plant, are genuine partners. Each flower provides millions of nutritious pollen grains, while the bees leave some grains on the stigma to pollinate the flower. A foot or so below ground, the bees store the pollen in as many as 16 chambers as food for their young. But even as the bees gather in this golden harvest, bandits strike. Parasitic flies who look like bees hover over the tunnel openings and squirt their eggs down toward the pollen stores below. If they succeed, their young will kill the larval bees. The turrets are a defense against the flies, making it difficult for them to hit their target. When the chambers are full of nectar and pollen, their owners fill in the tunnels to prevent further attack. But this incessant labor soon takes its toll. The bees work and work until they are too weak to fly. Soon they will all die. But the next generation of bees is on its way. In just 2 days, the eggs laid by the dying females have become grubs, larval bees, and each grub has a fully stocked larder of pollen and nectar. Each larder contains precisely enough food for the grub to develop and become a bee. Within 2 weeks, all the females of this generation are dead. But each female bee has made and provisioned many underground chambers, and several 100,000 females work this nest site. A new generation of bees, millions of them, erupt from the soil. The males emerge first and hover over the nest site. Searching for females, some dig back into the soil. Others stand guard over tunnel entrances, waiting for the females to emerge. The males are little more than reproductive robots. Their sole purpose is to get at a female. As she emerges, each female is smothered by a mob of frantic males trying desperately to mate. The commotion at the bee site is a magnet to predators. The male bees cannot sting. Their only defense is their sheer numbers. It's very hard to attack one bee in a confusing mass of thousands. These cannot even afford the luxury of trying to escape. For local woodpeckers, this is like winning the lottery. There is abundant food for their chicks. Curved-billed thrashers usually struggle to feed their brood. Some years they fail completely, but this pair has it easy. The bees still outnumber their predators, thousands to one. The new females allow just one partner to mate. The females will then scatter to live alone in the desert for another year, until the prickly pears flower, and it all begins over again. And on this small patch of soil, which for 3 weeks staged a spectacular pageant of death and renewal, nothing but a few scattered husks remains. For the thrashers, the easy life is over. A king snake has discovered their chicks and is making a precarious assault on their fortress in the Saguaro Cactus. The snake is not deterred by the cholla's barrier of spines, but the adult thrashers attack. The snake is no threat to them, and a barrage of pecks persuades him to skydive to safety. By late May, with the golden harvest of the prickly pear but a fast-fading memory, the desert confronts the midsummer drought. The mighty saguaro, sustained by the 6 tons of water stored in its massive bulk, chooses this time to flower. The buds develop on the tips of the arms and trunk, up to 300 on a healthy saguaro. Drought bites hard into the desert, and the saguaro responds, sustaining not only itself, but many other desert creatures, linked in an intricate chain of relationships. The buds make their final preparations for a nocturnal liaison that the saguaro's life depends on. Heavy with the scent of ripe cantaloupe, they act as pale beacons in the night. Nectar bats have migrated north from Mexico to arrive in the desert just as the saguaro comes into flower. The saguaros provide a complete food for the bats and their young, and as each bat visits dozens of cacti every night, they carry pollen from one flower to the next. It is a mating dance with perfect choreography. But the midsummer night is the setting for more sinister rituals. Some creatures now become cannibals. In this time of famine, sand scorpions turn on one another. It's eat or be eaten, sometimes both. Even the tiny vibrations of the scorpion's struggle can be detected by some predators. The shovel-nosed snake joins in a grisly feast as desperate creatures all over Sonora hunt and devour one another. The cool of the night is the time when the desert comes to life. Terrible monsters are on the prowl. When the senses of touch and smell and the detection of faint movements bring rich rewards. It is a time of opportunity and danger. Grasshopper mice guard their babies, but they must leave from time to find food. They too are predators. Outside, the night is alive with dangers. The giant centipede, up to 10 inches long, could easily consume a baby mouse. Both mice defend their young, but the female is by far the most determined and aggressive. It takes all her agility to avoid the centipede's venomous fangs. The mouse is triumphant. Her mate has only to look on. The contest was one-sided. The ferocious little grasshopper mice are like wolves in their tiny world. For them, this giant centipede was not a threat, but an opportunity. In the morning, the saguaros prepare for daytime visitors. Birds feast on pollen and nectar, a life-saving miracle in the grim days of June. Their heads become coated with sticky yellow pollen, and flowers that the bats had missed are now safely pollinated. But the abundance of the saguaro is short-lived. The season of drought wears on. The heat in the Sonoran Desert can be intense. In June 1994, 128 degrees was recorded in western Arizona. Life is tested to the limits of its endurance. Little survives on the exposed soil where the surface temperatures reach 160 degrees and more. The soil is totally desiccated, and the plants that survive do so by slowing their metabolisms to the brink of death. Only the succulent cacti seem at ease now. and they rely on elaborate adaptations to survive the drought. They have no leaves as such. Instead, they have batteries of spines. They provide sun protection from the sun and fend off hungry animals. Inside this bizarre living fortress, sealed by the waxy, waterproof skin, is the only natural water to be found in the Sonora. Gallons in large cacti, enough to sustain these plants for a year or two. One plant is even stranger than the saguaro. The creosote bush has achieved a kind of immortality. It tolerates droughts which kill most desert plants. It is sustained by powerful roots, and its leaves are sealed with a remarkable resin. It is so tough and persistent, it can live for thousands of years, one of the oldest living things on Earth. The animal's strategies for survival are often simple but highly effective. They cling to the shade and stay as still as possible. Conserving precious moisture and energy, they wait the season out. But this cruel season always claims some victims. A lingering death after infernal torment. Even in normal years, it seems a miracle that life can exist here. But just as the heat and famine reach their peak, the Saguaro cactus draws on its great reserves to triumph over its environment. Strangely, the saguaros chose this moment to ripen their fruits. A colossal metabolic effort just when all other plant life is at a standstill. A 200-year-old saguaro has done everything slowly and against all odds. 10 years to grow its first inch, 60 years to attain 10 feet. Only a few survive to become giants, the lords of Sonora, the masters of time. For the saguaros, fruiting is the climax of their struggle to reproduce, and it consumes fully half of all the energy they can muster. The nectar bats that pollinated the saguaro's flowers now gorge themselves on the fruits they helped to create. The fruiting saguaro now signals the desert's revival. But gathered beneath the towering cactus, javelina are vulnerable to predators. Weakened by starvation, this javelina was too slow to escape. Its emaciated body will keep the coyotes going for several weeks. The coyotes compete for the food that will help them through the famine. But the saguaros have more subtle ways of ensuring their survival. There is only one reason for the production of all these bright red fruits: to ensure the dispersal of the saguaro's seeds. Birds are eager accomplices, swallowing the seeds with the sweet pulp. Each fruit contains up to 2,000 nutritious seeds. And for these harvester ants, they are like manna from heaven. Of all the 40 million seeds that this saguaro may produce in its lifetime, over 36 million will be eaten by ants. And the ants will be harvested too. The regal horned lizard is dependent on the saguaro too, for as fast as the ants eat saguaro seeds, he eats the ants. Fighting back, the ants try to find a chink in the lizard's armor. The lizard will not be discouraged or distracted. He is a perfect predator of ants. He is immune to their venom, and for months at a time he can extract all the moisture he needs from their hard little bodies. Unlike the lizard, the coyote will try to eat almost anything. The swelling below his eye is not a wound. It's the lizard's last defense. Squirted from a specialized tear duct, a stream of blood is aimed at the coyote's face. The blood is laced with substances that are so distasteful, the coyote wants nothing more to do with the lizard. It is the season of the summer rains. Sometimes the billowing clouds coming north from the Sea of Cortez do bring cooling rains. Sometimes the clouds simply vanish, taking life and hope with them. And once in a great while, they turn a natural furnace into a naked flame. The desert's craving for moisture is answered only with a pent-up fury. Wildfires are new to the Sonoran. Plants introduced by man are what make the brush dense enough to burn. So native plants are highly vulnerable, although all but the most unlucky animals can escape the flames. It is now August, and a searing wind rattles the very bones of the desert. Day after day, the clouds race in, but they are consumed by the heat that rises from the scalded plains. It's as if a battle is raging between the gods of earth and water, Earth rejecting the very substance it needs so desperately. Finally, the skies prevailed. First comes hard rain, driven before a violent wind. Then the monsoon arrives. In seconds, the Sonoran Desert is engulfed in water. No soil can quickly absorb this quantity of rain, not even one as parched as the Sonoran. Channels that have not felt the caress of water for months or years become raging cataracts. Then, quite suddenly, the rains that arrived on the wings of thunder fade with the evening light. An alien from another world, this little spade-foot toad has been deep underground for a year, hiding from the drought. He and his kind have just a few days now to breed and to feed before desert conditions return. The first night after the rains, the air is filled with their sounds. Males calling out to females in the fragrant, rain-washed darkness. It's the male's one chance to secure a mate and fertilize her eggs. But for their offspring, the race has just begun. The next morning, the desert is bathed in the unaccustomed luxury of moisture. The regal horned lizard is freed from the inconvenience of extracting water from ants. Instead, tiny channels between his scales deliver the water to his mouth by capillary action. If there is ever a time when the desert is at ease, it is now. Within days, the Sonoran Desert is transformed by an alchemy of warmth and water. The roots of the giant saguaro now draw in hundreds of gallons a day, reserves that will sustain it through the next year and beyond. Its girth expands almost 50% as it soaks up water. And the monsoon continues for a while with the daily ritual of storm clouds and fierce winds. But by now, the saguaro is plump and top-heavy. It weighs several tons, and its roots are less able to grip the damp soil. And so the giant falls, not to the classic armory of the desert, to heat or desiccation, but because of the wind and the water it is hoarded so successfully. In scattered pools, the desert's aliens, the little spade-foot tadpoles, are flourishing. Amphibians that had magically appeared in one of the driest places on Earth. But their tiny water world is slowly shrinking. Every day it is a little more crowded, and food is scarce. As they begin to starve, some become cannibals, turning on each other. But the desert will not tolerate standing water for long, and the world of the tadpoles simply disappears. They will not survive. The rains did not last long enough to give them any lease on life. Many generations may perish this way before the right sequence of rains allows a few to become adult toads. The parent spadefoot toads will disappear as well, digging themselves so deep into the mud that severe heat cannot reach them. They may lie here for years, all but dead, nursing just a flicker of life until the next great rains revive them. Now, with the magical catalyst of water, this violent, haunting place has become a fragrant, blissful Eden. The desert blooms. And creeping out of the barren earth, seedling saguaros appear. They are tiny and unassuming, not much larger than a grain of sand. By the millions, they are eaten by insects, birds, and small animals. Only 1 out of 40 million original seeds may survive. After growing ever so slowly for a century or more, it will join the giants of Sonora. In some years, if the rains are especially generous, the Sonoran desert is transformed. It is festooned with stunning shades of green and carpeted with brilliant flowers. Life has always existed here, often hidden and suppressed. But now, however briefly, it bursts forth. A sign of triumph and a time of celebration.
We hope you have enjoyed this presentation from the National Geographic Video Library.